Melissa Grant had never expected to be underestimated so profoundly. But that morning, as she stood in front of the mirror tying her hair into a loose bun and slipping into an old beige cardigan, she knew she was stepping into unfamiliar waters. Not because she hadn't been overlooked before, she had, but because this time, she was doing it on purpose. At 41, Melissa still carried the soft, youthful look that had made her seem younger than she was. It was the same look that had once caused Thomas's high society mother to raise an eyebrow when he brought her to a family gala 15 years ago. This morning, Melissa wore no makeup, her jeans were faded from years of wear, and her shoes were scuffed. A soft brown handbag hung over her shoulder. She looked every bit the average woman running a routine errand. "You sure you want to go through with this?" Thomas asked from across the room, straightening the collar of his navy blue suit. At 58, Thomas Grant carried the sharp confidence of a man who had built an empire from nothing, his silver hair neatly combed, his gold watch gleaming even in the morning light. "We agreed," Melissa said, glancing at him. "If we want the truth about how your new branch is treating everyday people, we need to see it for ourselves." Thomas nodded but didn't look away. "Just, be careful. People who think they have power can get nasty when they're called out." Melissa gave him a reassuring smile. "I've handled worse. Remember your Aunt Meredith's Thanksgiving dinner?" Thomas let out a laugh. "Don't remind me." But neither of them were truly laughing. Just 3 months earlier, Thomas's company, Grant Financial Holdings, had acquired Heritage Trust Bank, a mid-sized banking network with a reputation that, on paper, looked prestigious. But complaints had been flooding in about one particular branch, Brighton. Patrons claimed the staff were cold, judgmental, dismissive, and downright discriminatory toward clients who didn't appear wealthy. Melissa would go in first, posing as a regular walk-in customer wanting to deposit a personal check and inquire about a loan. Thomas would arrive 1 hour later for a scheduled meeting with the branch manager. Their goal: discover how the branch really treated people, when no one knew who they were. "Lunch after?" she asked, pulling on a plain coat. "Same little Italian place?" he asked. Melissa nodded. "Of course," he said, planting a kiss on her cheek. "I'll meet you there after your admission. Just don't let them get under your skin." Melissa smiled. "If things get ugly, I'll just imagine I'm undercover for a documentary." Thomas watched her walk out the door, a flicker of worry still on his face. The Brighton branch of Heritage Trust Bank stood proudly at the corner of Main and 7th, its glass facade gleaming under the late morning sun. From the outside, it radiated exclusivity: polished marble steps, brass handles, and frosted glass with gold lettering that declared, a tradition of excellence since 1928. Melissa parked their 10-year-old hatchback, intentionally chosen for this outing, in a public lot down the street rather than pulling up to the bank's reserved parking area. Everything about her approach was deliberate. As she walked toward the entrance, she took mental notes. The security guard at the revolving doors didn't greet her, didn't even glance in her direction, though he nodded politely at a man in a tailored suit who walked in just ahead of her. Inside, the air conditioning hummed softly. The floors gleamed. Oil paintings of colonial mansions and sailing ships lined the walls. A soft instrumental version of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata played from hidden speakers. It was clear, this was a place that wanted to remind you of old money. Melissa stepped toward the reception desk where a young man with a buzz cut and crisply ironed shirt sat behind a screen. He glanced up at her, first with a neutral expression, then with a flicker of something else. He looked her over, the cardigan, the jeans, the practical shoes. His smile thinned slightly. "Good morning," Melissa offered with a bright, friendly tone. "I'd like to make a deposit and speak with someone about a personal loan." "Do you have an account with us?" he asked, the friendliness in his voice already dampened. "Yes, I do," Melissa replied. "Melissa Grant." He began typing into his computer, his fingers moving quickly across the keys. After a moment, he frowned. "I don't see you in our system." That's odd, she said, maintaining her composure. I've had a personal checking account here for years. Could you check under M. Grant as well? The young man exhaled quietly, barely concealing his impatience. He typed again, this time slower, and frowned harder. Still nothing. Maybe you're confusing us with another Heritage Trust location? This branch has higher balance requirements and we serve a more specialized clientele. The tone was clear. It wasn't that he couldn't find her. It was that he assumed she didn't belong. I'm quite certain, Melissa said, a hint of steel entering her voice. Could you perhaps connect me with someone in customer service? The receptionist motioned toward a tall woman at a desk near the inner offices. Miss Jensen can assist you. Melissa turned toward the woman, who was wearing a fitted navy suit and had her dark hair swept into a tight bun. Miss Jensen was sorting paperwork, but when she saw Melissa approach, her gaze flicked briefly to the cardigan, the jeans, the shoes, and then just as quickly looked away with a faint, dismissive smile. Can I help you? She asked, her voice clipped. Yes, Melissa said, unfazed. I need to deposit a personal check and inquire about a loan. Miss Jensen arched a brow. Do you have an appointment? No, Melissa answered, but I was hoping I could speak to someone briefly. Well, Jensen replied, tapping her pen against a folder, we generally require appointments for loan consultations. Especially for significant amounts. There was a pause. Melissa gave a small nod. Perhaps an exception can be made. Miss Jensen gave a smile that didn't touch her eyes. Let's start with some identification, shall we? Melissa reached into her bag and handed over her driver's license. Jensen held it up to the light, turning it slowly, her brow furrowed as if looking for signs of forgery. Brookfield address, she commented. That's quite a drive. What brings you to Brighton? I had business nearby, Melissa replied smoothly. I thought I'd take care of some banking while I was here. Jensen handed the ID back with a stiff smile. And what exactly are you hoping to deposit today? Melissa pulled out the check, folded neatly in a plain envelope, and handed it over. Jensen took the check with 2 fingers and read the amount. $6,000, she said, the number barely audible, but the tone unmistakable. Yes, Melissa answered, watching her closely. And where did this come from? It's from my personal account at Brookfield First. Jensen turned the check over in her hand like it might be counterfeit. We do have procedures for unexpected transactions, she said loudly enough for the people in line nearby to hear. Especially from clients who don't bank here regularly. Melissa's temper flared, but she kept it in check. I wouldn't call a simple deposit unexpected. Ordinarily, no, Jensen said with mock pleasantness, but we have standards at Heritage Trust. We cater to a certain clientele. A man in an expensive-looking suit behind Melissa gave a soft chuckle. Melissa glanced around. Several customers were now watching. She felt her cheeks warm, but not from embarrassment, from anger. Melissa took a steady breath, resisting the impulse to say what she really thought. The old her might have snapped back, demanded respect. But today wasn't about ego, it was about observation. Exposure. Are you refusing to deposit my check? She asked evenly, her voice loud enough to carry. Jensen's mouth curled slightly. Not at all. But there will be an extended hold period. Possibly up to 15 business days. Verification and all. Melissa narrowed her eyes. 15 business days? That's excessive and not in line with any standard banking policy I'm aware of. It's our policy for non-standard transactions from infrequent clients, Jensen replied curtly. Melissa bit her tongue. She knew full well that any decent institution would place a 2-day hold at most for a personal check of this size, especially from a fellow domestic bank. I'd like to speak with your branch manager, Melissa said. Jensen's smile froze into a brittle line. I'm afraid Mr. Delaney is in meetings all morning. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable conducting your business at another institution. One that suits your financial profile. Melissa raised an eyebrow. My financial profile? Jensen leaned forward, voice lowered to a whisper, but not so low that those nearby couldn't hear. Let's be honest. This branch serves high-value individuals with serious assets and financial portfolios. From your appearance and this rather unusual transaction, I'm guessing you don't meet that mark. Melissa looked around. A few clients were pretending not to stare. Others clearly were, some with mild amusement, others with discomfort. So you're judging me based on what? My clothes? Melissa said, her voice calm, but now deliberately loud. I'm making a professional assessment, Jensen snapped. The pretense of courtesy was gone. And you're holding up my schedule with a questionable check and vague financial intentions. There's nothing questionable about my check or my intentions, Melissa said, eyes fixed on the woman in front of her. Jensen straightened up. Look, I don't have time for this. You're clearly not our typical client. We have other customers waiting, customers who dress like they belong here. That was it. Melissa's spine straightened. Her voice didn't rise, but it struck like a bell in the now quiet room. I want to speak to your manager. Immediately. I think it's time you leave, Jensen said, her voice tight, finger pointing toward the exit. We don't serve people like you. You don't serve people like, Melissa repeated, in disbelief. We don't serve freeloaders who come in with questionable funds and demand priority treatment, Jensen snapped. Take your check and go. The room had fallen completely silent. The receptionist had frozen in place. The suited man in line earlier now looked away awkwardly. An elderly woman in the seating area stood up slowly, her brows furrowed in shock. Even the background music seemed to fade away. Melissa stared at the teller for a long moment, the words settling like a stone in her chest. I can't believe this is happening, she said. It's happening, Jensen snapped. And unless you can prove you're someone of standing, you're done here. At that moment, the security guard reappeared from near the lobby doors, alerted by the escalating tone. He was tall, maybe in his late 50s, with a calm but wary face. Is there a problem, Miss Jensen? He asked. Jensen gave him a sharp nod. Please escort this woman out. She's being disruptive. The guard glanced at Melissa, his brow lifting slightly in surprise. Ma'am? I'm just trying to deposit a check and ask about a loan, Melissa said, her voice even but strained. Apparently that makes me a threat. The guard hesitated. You could see in his eyes that he knew something was off. But duty was duty. Would you mind stepping outside with me, ma'am? He said, not unkindly. Melissa didn't fight. She nodded once, collected her belongings, and stood with her back straight. As she was guided out of the bank, she caught glimpses of the customers, some stunned, some silent, a few even sympathetic. But no one said a word. Outside, on the granite steps, the air felt heavier. The guard stood beside her, arms folded. For what it's worth, I'm sorry about that, he said quietly. Miss Jensen's not the easiest. Is she like this with everyone? Melissa asked. He looked back at the building before answering. Let's just say some folks get different treatment than others. It's been that way for a while. Melissa checked her watch. 11:45 a.m. Thomas would be arriving in 15 minutes. For a brief second, she considered staying right there, waiting to witness Jensen's face when she realized who Melissa really was. But then she smiled to herself. No. It would be better if it happened exactly as planned. She nodded politely to the guard. Thank you. For being decent. And with that, she walked calmly back toward the parking lot, her phone already dialing Thomas as she went. Thomas Grant's black town car pulled up precisely at noon, its dark exterior gleaming in the sunlight as the driver came around to open the door. Thomas stepped out with effortless authority, his tailored suit sharp, his leather shoes polished to a mirror shine, and his expression controlled, but unreadable. Waiting for him around the corner was Melissa, now standing beside a row of neatly trimmed hedges, looking calm but firm. He took one look at her and saw everything he needed to know. "They actually made you leave?" he asked, voice tight, low. Melissa gave a single nod. "Security escorted me out. Jensen said I didn't look like the kind of person they serve." Thomas exhaled slowly, as if pressing rage into a cube of ice. "Did they even check your account?" "She didn't bother," Melissa said. "She assumed I was lying. Accused me of bringing in a suspicious check. Said I was holding up the line with vague intentions." Thomas clenched his jaw. For years, he'd pushed for every branch in his financial group to be inclusive, serving retirees, single parents, immigrants, small business owners, and anyone who needed real support. Elitism was not part of the company charter. And yet here it was, on full display. "She pointed at my clothes," Melissa added, her voice flat. "Said I didn't dress for a premier financial institution." Thomas didn't respond. He simply turned toward the building and started walking. The same security guard who had escorted Melissa out stood at the door. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of Thomas, then flicked to Melissa beside him. She gave a small, knowing nod. He stepped aside without a word. Inside the bank, things were back to their usual rhythm. The same clients filled the chairs, the same instrumental music floated softly through the air, and the staff moved about with an air of routine sophistication. Miss Jensen was at her desk again, speaking with a couple clad in matching blazers. She smiled as she leaned forward, offering what appeared to be portfolio advice. At the front of the branch, Gregory Delaney, the branch manager, was emerging from a conference room. He spotted Thomas immediately. "Mr. Grant." Delaney strode forward, extending a hand. "We weren't expecting you for another hour." Thomas didn't shake his hand. Instead, he gestured toward Melissa. "This is my wife, Melissa Grant." Delaney froze mid-step. His eyes flicked to Melissa, his brows pinching slightly in confusion, then, slowly, the reality began to settle in. "Your wife?" "Yes," Thomas said, voice razor-sharp. "Who was just removed from your building 30 minutes ago by security, at the instruction of one of your senior staff." Delaney paled. "There must be some misunderstanding. We would never." "It was that woman," Melissa said calmly, her finger pointing toward Jensen. "She didn't even try to help me. She just judged." At that moment, Jensen, sensing a shift in the room, looked up. Her smile faltered as she noticed Melissa. Then her gaze landed on Thomas beside her. And her face changed. There was confusion. Then dread. Then fear. Delaney cleared his throat, his voice tight. "Perhaps we could speak in my office." "No," Thomas cut in. "What happened didn't occur behind closed doors. Neither will the consequences." He walked straight past Delaney, Melissa at his side, and strode through the bank like he owned it. Because he did. Every employee in the building began to notice. Conversations dropped to whispers. Clients paused their transactions. Jensen stood up behind her desk as Thomas and Melissa approached, her back straightening as if she could will herself invisible. "Good afternoon, sir," she said, her voice suddenly syrupy. "How can I help?" "You can begin," Thomas interrupted, "by explaining why you dismissed my wife from this bank." Jensen's mouth opened, then closed. Her hands folded in front of her. I didn't realize she was." "That's the problem," Thomas said, his voice carrying through the entire room. "You didn't recognize her. And so you assumed she didn't matter." Jensen blinked, her carefully composed smile frozen mid-expression. Her lips parted as if to offer a defense, but Thomas held up a hand. "Don't," he said simply. "You've already said enough." The silence in the room was deafening. A teller halfway through a transaction stopped mid-count. A manager at the far end of the branch slowly slid his chair back from his desk. Even the background music felt distant, as if the sound system itself understood it was no longer appropriate. "Melissa Grant," Thomas continued, gesturing to his wife, "came into this branch an hour ago with a perfectly valid check and a reasonable request for loan information. She wasn't rude. She wasn't disruptive. She was, however, judged." Jensen stiffened. "I had no idea she was." "That's exactly the problem," Thomas snapped, his voice calm but cutting. "You didn't know who she was. So you assumed she was no one." He turned to face the room fully. "Let me make this clear for everyone here, employees, clients, management alike. My name is Thomas Grant. I'm the CEO of Grant Financial Holdings. As of 3 months ago, we acquired controlling interest in Heritage Trust Bank." A wave of realization rippled across the lobby. Several clients gasped. Employees exchanged alarmed glances. A young teller at the front bit her lip, eyes wide. Jensen's face had gone pale. "My wife was asked to leave," Thomas continued, "because of how she looked. Because she didn't fit the image this branch has cultivated, an image of exclusivity, snobbery, and quiet cruelty dressed up as professionalism." He looked straight at Jensen. "You judged her not on her credit history. Not on her account balance. Not even on the contents of the check she presented. You judged her based on a cardigan and a pair of shoes." Jensen was visibly trembling now. "Mr. Grant, I assure you, I've always followed protocol." "No, Miss Jensen," Thomas interrupted, his tone absolute. "You followed prejudice. You followed assumption. And you followed a broken culture that I will no longer tolerate." He turned back to Delaney, the branch manager, who looked like he might faint. "Mr. Delaney, I'll need access to your office for the next several hours. I intend to conduct private interviews with your entire staff. I'll be starting with the security guard, who, unlike your assistant branch officer, showed my wife human decency." Delaney nodded mutely, his voice caught in his throat. Thomas looked back at Jensen. "As for you," he said, "you are suspended, effective immediately. Whether that suspension becomes permanent will depend on the results of a full investigation." Jensen's voice was barely a whisper. "But I've worked here for 8 years. With what I'm sure is an impeccable record," Thomas said. "With certain types of clients. But a bank, this bank, serves all customers. Or it should." He gestured toward the exit. "Please gather your belongings. HR will contact you tomorrow." Jensen didn't move. Melissa stepped forward then, her voice steady, kind but firm. "There's no triumph in this for me," she said. "But I hope it's a lesson. The true measure of a person isn't how they treat people they think are important. It's how they treat people they think aren't." Jensen looked down, unable to hold Melissa's gaze. Slowly, she stepped away from the desk and walked toward the back office, her heels echoing like drumbeats of retreat. Thomas turned to the room again. "To our clients here today, I apologize. Not for being exposed to this moment, but for the fact that such moments still happen." No one spoke. But no one left, either. 1 month later, Thomas and Melissa Grant returned to the Brighton branch, not as investigators in disguise, but as themselves. The building looked the same on the outside, still sleek glass and polished stone, but as soon as they stepped through the doors, the difference was tangible. The reception area had been redesigned, gone were the cold marble counters and tall, intimidating partitions. In their place stood low, welcoming stations where customers and staff sat eye to eye. The security desk was now labeled customer support, with a soft-lit welcome sign overhead. Even the lighting had changed, warmer, less clinical, more human. "Mr. and Mrs. Grant," a familiar voice called out. They turned to see the security guard from that unforgettable day, now wearing a new badge on his chest, James Wilson, Customer Experience Manager. "James." Melissa smiled warmly. "Congratulations on your promotion." James returned the smile, his posture more relaxed, his face brighter. "Thank you. Honestly, I didn't expect any of this, but I'm grateful." Thomas extended a hand. "You earned it. You treated Melissa with dignity when no one else did." James nodded, glancing around the bustling lobby. "The new policies have changed everything. Staff training, anonymous feedback systems, mystery shoppers, it's not the same place anymore." Melissa looked around, noticing the difference in energy. Clients in business suits stood beside older patrons in worn jackets. A young mother with a toddler on her hip received patient assistance from a teller. The atmosphere was welcoming, still professional, but far more inclusive. "Business doing better?" Thomas asked. "Actually, yes," James replied. "Turns out, when people feel like they belong, they want to come back." They chatted for several minutes, catching up on staffing changes, community outreach programs, and the new initiatives rolling out across other branches. Several employees came over to shake their hands, some new, some familiar but now changed in demeanor. No one seemed tense or fearful. If anything, they were relieved. As the Grants made their way toward the exit, Melissa paused near the lobby wall. There, framed in gold and displayed prominently above a handcrafted wooden sign, was a statement of company values. At the top, written in bold, simple lettering, were the words, "Every person deserves our respect." She stood still for a moment, letting the words settle in her chest. Thomas placed a hand gently on her back. "You know," she said softly, "some good really did come out of that awful day." He nodded. "Sometimes, you have to expose the rot before you can rebuild something better." Melissa smiled, not with pride, but with peace. Because in a world where power was too often confused with status, where judgment came quicker than understanding, and where dignity was so easily dismissed, she had proven one simple truth. Sometimes, being underestimated is the most powerful position of all. Value learned. Human dignity is not defined by appearance or social status, but by how each person is treated, with equal respect, regardless of who they are. The lesson we take away. Never judge someone by their appearance. You don't know who they are, what they've been through, or what power they might hold. The story of Melissa Grant clearly teaches us that. Someone who appears ordinary may have the power to change an entire system. A seemingly small act of discrimination, like dismissing a customer, can have serious consequences if it reflects a deeper, toxic culture. And when people in power use their position to create fairness and treat everyone with dignity, society becomes stronger and more just. Another powerful takeaway. Cultural transformation doesn't only begin with correcting what's wrong, it also begins with recognizing what's right, like how the honest security guard was acknowledged and given a chance to grow.